closing of curtains, end of an era, beginning of new stories, all of that stuff, ending of chapters in people's lives. Yep. New chapter in my life will be beginning next week. I will be job hunting again because I'm leaving my current job. The manager asked me what I thought of him, and I told him, and he didn't like it. So I put in my 2 weeks. Chip is currently downstairs. He may show up at some point in time during the video. I'm not sure. He may not be as much of be in the background of videos as Brenda and Rainey were, but okay, time for the chapter. So first we start off with a nice big color page spread, which looks really nice. I really like this one. So we have a bunch of the Straw Hats along with Tama, Yamato, and Shinobu, and a bunch of Tanukis and foxes all dressed like ninjas, all eating roasted potatoes, roasted sweet potatoes, which is adorable. I think this is adorable. So we have Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper are all here. It's kind of like an autumn foresty setting, which is very apropos for this time of year. And they're all dressed in like nice warm clothing and everything, and we get to see Yamato and Tama in like modern clothing, which is kind of nice. I think we've seen Yamato in like modern clothing in like one of the other color cover pages, like the swimsuit one or whatever. We saw Yamato there, but like we haven't really seen Tama, I don't think, in like modern clothing, so this is kind of cute. Shinobu is also in the background. They are roasting the sweet potatoes, and then they are just having fun eating them, which is adorable. Sanji's probably supervising. So just nice little fun thing there. Fun little fall atmosphere. And now we go into chapter 1166. New Tales. So we pick up right where the previous chapter left off. Garp and Roger have managed to both land their very high-octane, hockey-powered attacks on Rox, who is now lying on the ground on his back, just beaten and bruised, and it's the aftermath of the battle. And Rox is thinking, did they really break the curse? So Roger and Garp seem to have essentially brute forced their way through dispelling the Domi Reversi on Rox. Unfortunately, it essentially puts both of them in a very precarious position, because both of them are essentially kind of the way that Luffy gets sometimes, where they are just out of hockey and just kind of defenseless at the moment. They can't really do much. They put so much of their power into these attacks that they're kind of not even running on fumes at this point in time. They are kind of on empty at the moment. And we see Garp and Roger in the background. Of course, it's raining in this, so great atmosphere there. And just, yeah, we see Garp and Roger just beaten and bloody and bruised and all of that. Just, off to the side. And Rox is just like, he's like, okay, come on. Stay alive. This island is gonna sink. We gotta get off this island. It's gonna get destroyed. He's just like running through his head. And like Garp and Roger are just also out cold at this point in time. Rox is like barely hanging on at the moment. And then we see from Rox's perspective, which is upside down, these three figures coming out of the shadows and the misty rain. And they're the God's Knights. One of them is clearly Garling with his signature crescent moon hairstyle. But we have Summers, Garling, and Maffy have come out of the shadows, out of the smoke and the rubble and the rain. And Rox is still thinking, damn it, it's too late. Roger, Garp, run. You can't die here. And he, this is what's going through Rox's head. He doesn't have the physical ability to be able to voice what he is thinking right now, probably because he's also just so just way past running on fumes at this point in time, and very just so badly injured and everything else like that. And he's, so he's just like, he wants Roger and Garp to escape. He doesn't want them to die there the way that he's pretty sure he's going to die. And I think this is something that we have seen throughout the course of this flashback. And even to a degree with the way that Garp kind of didn't want to talk about God Valley a lot, which is we've seen the reasons why, and we're going to see more of them later. For why Garp didn't want to talk about God Valley, why he's like, no, I'm not going to talk about God Valley to pretty much anyone who asks. And what we have here is like Roger and Garp very much respect each other, and this incident that is happening here is one of those other reasons that explain why they respect each other. And even Rox has respect for both of them. He viewed Roger as his rival. Or Roger viewed himself as Rox's rival. Pretty sure on his own, I don't think Roger would have been able to defeat Rox, even without the dummy Reversi being brought into play. But it would have been quite the fight. And it is very much this thing where it's just like there is this respect and this rivalry that goes into this. Not quite frenemies, but very much like that type of a setup that's going on there for those characters. And Rox has pretty much accepted at this point in time that he's not going to survive this. But he doesn't want Roger and Garp to go the same way as him. And we see Summers and Garling and Maffey have made their way over. I still think Maffey looks like Cruella de Vil. I still stand by that until we get her. Even with like whatever her color scheme ends up being, I'm still going to say she looks like Cruella de Vil. And like they're all healed up from whatever injuries they have sustained. The last time we saw Summers, he got shot through a wall by Rayleigh, so Rayleigh could save Shocky. And Garling got his butt kicked by Rox. So, and like they're coming out of the rain, and we hear, Rox is still thinking, oh yeah, there's one more thing. And we see the panel, and we see that Garling is raising his sword up right above Rox's throat. And Rox is still thinking, I wanted to say, and I'm assuming it's like the sound for like stabbing or whatever is the sound that we're seeing for the onomatopoeia. And we see what is supposed to be blood. And it's, thanks for stopping me. And it's like those last thoughts that Rox has are thoughts of gratitude to Garp and Roger for stopping him, for preventing him from going any further and hurting any other innocents. And with what we are seeing here, the actual end of Rox, I still stand by the video that I made last week, where one of the other ones that I went over was Rox's death and what type of a death it was. I still stand by the fact that it is a death in regards to protecting someone and something, because it was Rox asking Garp and Roger to end him. And no, Rox and Roger, or Garp and Roger, are not the ones to actually end him. It's Garling that does it. And it's, he's stealing the kill, essentially. But, like, if Garp and Roger had managed to still be, like, conscious during all of this, or still able to do something, they probably would have tried to stop Garling. The curse thing on Rox has been broken, which is what they were trying to do, even if it meant having to end Rox, but Rox was still alive. Don't know how much longer he would have lasted had this not happened. But Rox is still alive at the end of that part of the clash, and then Garling comes along and steals that kill. And it's very much that whole concept of, the whole question of, like, well, what if Rox had survived? What if they had, if some of, if, like, Rayleigh and Scopper, because we're going to see them in a second, if they've shown up sooner, would they have been able to get the God's Knights away from Rox? And maybe save Rox or something. Something may have happened if like Whitebeard and Big Mom and Kaido, if they'd shown up and actually tried to help their captain and get Rox out of there? Would that have been something like how much, like, yeah, the Rox pirates may have still been disbanded because like Rox is like in no condition to be able to be taken, is no condition to lead them at the moment. And like their fractures were big enough at the time to show that they don't make a good crew anymore. But maybe there would have been at least something that allowed for Rox to be gotten somewhere safe where he could have either been, healed, fixed up. They find a doctor, someone to take care of him. They don't have Crocus at this point in time, but I'm sure they can find a doctor somewhere that could help take care of Rox and get him, treatment and everything. And, maybe in the long run, it may not have had a huge amount of ramifications, but maybe it could have at least resulted in maybe having Rox find a way to get back to Eris and Teach and maybe give them the chance to say goodbye to them one more time in a less, I have to get you out of here and I'm sorry I turned into a monster and I really thought that I killed you, so I'm glad that you didn't and I want to thank the kid that helped you type of a thing. That whole concept there. So there's like that question that kind of comes into play. That's like a whole what if scenario. So Rox is definitely dead at this point in time. And we see Rayleigh and Scopper have shown up. They have grabbed Garp and Roger and are running as fast as they can. And we have Roger and Garp are like, how's Rox? What's going on? And, we have Scopper is carrying Garp and Rayleigh is carrying Roger. And they're just running and running and running. And then it's just like, you're worried about the enemy. It was just like, I'm your enemy too. It's like Garp's like, I'm your enemy too. And you're kind of still saving me. And Roger is like, Rayleigh, tell me what happened to Rox. And Rayleigh kind of hesitates for a second. And like, we see Rayleigh, Roger's sword is there. And we see Rayleigh has the straw hat. So they're all safe. Both men have lost their coats. Both Roger and Garp are going to have to get new coats. Oh no. But, we got the straw hat and we got the sword. We got Ace. That's fine. And Rayleigh is just like, he was killed. And I don't think Rayleigh liked that. Again, we get these where it's like, and we kind of saw this a little bit on Hachinosu, where we saw the Roger pirates and the Rox pirates, even if Rayleigh wasn't there, Rayleigh was on the ship, as opposed to being on Hachinosu to go see Shaki. Everybody else went to go see Shaki. He stayed on the ship. Much to her displeasure. And like Roger and the others were like kind of, just kind of telling stories and laughing and stuff like that with the ones who were at the bar at that point in time with the Rox crew that were there. And I think that included Rox. And no, Garp was not there. Garp wouldn't have been able to get through on Hachi. He's like, I'm here to... That would have been a funny way of like parlaying. Is like have Garp show up at Hachinosu and be like, well, I've come to visit Shaki's bar. Just like, I'm sorry, what now? Yeah, I know the rules. If I show up to go to see Shaki's bar, and I don't fight, and I don't cause problems, I can go in and I can go to Shaki's bar. It's just like some random pirate lawyer. I mean, based on the code of conduct that we have come up with for this, he falls under the category, so... Okay. Just like confuse the heck out of everybody. That would have been funny. But like, yeah, we see that there. We see some of that. So that's kind of nice. But like, I don't think, like, Rayleigh doesn't understand what happened. Rayleigh doesn't know what happened. Scopper doesn't know what happened. Garp and Roger are the only two that really kind of have a good idea about what happened. And whether or not they're going to be explaining it to anybody is completely left up for debate. So we're cutting away from the island, and like the island is like collapsing in upon itself. And it's just like, hurry, the island's collapsing. Don't let the pirates escape. Roger's ship is on the move. Fire! And we just see like the island just like... Because like we kind of figured that like God Valley, unlike O'Hara, which was just destroyed by a Buster Call, and was still physically there, like the remnants of the island and stuff like that are still there. The remnants of the Tree of Knowledge are still there. We saw that with the little Vegapunk flashback. But with this, Leloucia is also a good example of this too, although I don't think there's a giant hole in the middle of the ocean where God Valley used to be. But like it is just crumbling into the sea. And that's why it's just like wiped off the map. And it's just like the narrator. This event would leave no mark on the pages of history. The crumbling island was swallowed by the waves and consumed by fog. And I'm just going to go through the narration first, and then we'll go through the pictures. The curtains closing on a grand stage. That was the essence of the God Valley incident. The silence in the incident's wake lasted only a moment before a massive bolt of lightning split the heavens. And with that, the curtain rose for new tales to unfold. So we get a double page spread where we're just like kind of seeing like all the little snippets that have like came together on God Valley and now are like going their separate ways again. So we see Garp is on one of the Marine ships. He's being treated. Rayleigh and Scopper must have like found Roger's ship or Garp's ship and been like, here, Bogard, take him. Bogard. Okay, fine. And like took care of that. And we see Roger is on the Oro Jackson as it's sailing away, all bandaged up. We see Whitebeard just kind of possibly lamenting the loss of his crew, of like his comrades at the moment. He doesn't know who survived necessarily. He's going to find out that Rox didn't, and that the others are all going their separate ways. We see Big Mom, who looks a little more happy, maybe because now she can go and return to being the captain of her own crew, in that regard. And, you know, she'll go and start building up more and more of the Big Mom pirates and start building up Totland, probably. With Streusen, we see Kaido flying away. He's now a dragon, so there's that. We see Dragon, as in Monkey D. Dragon. He still appears to be on the ship that he'd been on before, where we was holding his commanding officer at gunpoint in order to get him to let the other civilians onto the ship, which Dragon's going to pay for in a few minutes. We see Baby Shanks sleeping inside of the treasure chest full of hard, pointy, shiny things that he is somehow sleeping on. We see cutting to where we have Ivankov, Kuma, and Ginny, who are probably on Sorbet at this point in time because like the island is collapsing, so they have to have gotten away from the island. So we see the three of them there, and Kuma is just kind of out cold at the moment, and they're kind of like treating his wounds. And then the last panel, we see Teach with Eris's arms around him. And this little tiny version of Teach, I very much have sympathy for. I very much have sympathy for him at this point in time. And it gives a little bit more sympathy to Teach as a whole, as Blackbeard as a character, in regards to what we're seeing that he went through here at God Valley at like 2 years old. Possibly some core memories formed, but also how that lands in regards to like how much he's aware of about like how much of the real Rox is he aware of? Is he only aware of like what was in the papers and everything else like that? Like what was told? How much is Eris able to tell him? And how much does that implant and impart his own personality and the way that he desires to, you know, rule and everything else like that? So some questions there. To the Roger ship, we see the Oro Jackson sailing along. And it's like, still, hold on, hold it in there. Wait, just wait till Roger's up. So essentially what is going on is that they have gathered up a ton of the treasure and they want to have fun going through the treasure and being like, oh, I want this and I want this and I want that. You know, kind of the way the Straw Hats get sometimes when they get to go through treasure. And fair, if I by some chance ended up with like a mountain of treasure and I'm like, oh, I'm going to have fun looking at all of this. I'd be like, You don't even wear any of these jewels. I don't care. Bracelets, necklaces, rings, just everywhere, a crown, all that. I was like, I'm gonna go Nami and Scrooge McDuck and swim in the gold. Not quite that much gold here, but still quite a bit. And they're like, just wait till the captain wakes up. He's fine. And it's just like, come on, Captain, I'm dying to open up these the treasure chests. And we see Roger coming out of like what is probably sick bay, and we see Gloriosa is there. So we know that Gloriosa like tagged along with the Roger Pirates. We're going to see Shaki in a second, but we know that Gloriosa tagged along with them. She had to get off the island somehow. Presumably, a bunch of the others all managed to get off the island as well. That were the other members of the Rocks Pirates. And they're like, Roger, and he's just like, sorry to worry you guys. And, you know, he's just, like, all bandaged up. And they're just like, yeah, we're thrilled. More importantly, check it out. And he's like, you don't even care about me at all. Roger's like, really? You don't even care that I'm injured and I went through a whole ordeal? And they're like, but Captain, treasure! And we see this nice little panel here where we have Shaki just like hugging Rayleigh, and Rayleigh's got his arm on her, and it's just like, Shaki's safe and sound, and we scored a ton of treasure to boot. And they're just like all of the treasure and everything, which is just really fun. We see a bunch of them already have like bandages and everything else like that, because a lot of them probably got rather hurt during the fights and everything. So we're seeing a bunch of that. So just lots of sparkly treasure and everything, and it's just like, what a great haul. And then just like, goo, God. And they're like, the heck is that noise? And they're like, one of the chests is making funny noises. So they're like, well, that's not normal. And they're just like, what the heck? It's coming from that chest. There's something in it. Open it carefully. And Roger goes over and we got like Rayleigh next to him, and it's just like, click, gulp. It just like lifts the lid, and we see Roger and Rayleigh and Scopper and several of the others like looking down into the treasure chest, and they're like, huh? And it's just like a baby, and we see like little baby Shanks. And this is essentially the same scene that that got alluded to and kind of shown in film Red, because it is very similar to the way that in film Red, the way that Shanks and his crew find Uta, because she is in the treasure chest that they end up getting from one of the island, from when they, you know, capture a bunch of pirates, they steal their treasure, and they end up finding Uta in the treasure chest. This is essentially the same thing here, where, you know, we got like Shanks' little flashback to probably finding out how the Roger Pirates found him. It's like, oh, we find you in a treasure chest. So it's the law method. It's the Corazon method of put the baby in the treasure chest to keep it safe. Although in this case, Shanks ended up in the treasure chest of his own volition because, ooh, shiny things crawled toward it, ended up in the treasure chest. Scooped up by the Roger Pirates, and now he's here. So, and they're like, baby? And they're like, They don't show how they figure out Shanks' name. Assumedly, something is sewn into his clothing that, like, this is Shanks, this is Shamrock, has, like, Shanks sewn into his clothing somewhere. A lot of parents will do that. Just to be on the safe side with their kids, or just like the label one kid's clothing over the other kid, just to keep them separate, particularly if they have twins, to do that. So assumedly that's what's going to happen here, because Shanks is not old enough to be able to say his name. Shanks is like a year old. I have been around many a year old, and they cannot say their name. Regardless of anime facts or manga logic, probably not gonna happen. So there's just like probably like something sewn into his clothing that says this is Shanks or something. Oh, I just had a thought for how they could know that this is Shanks. Okay, so slim chance. We know that Shaki, unfortunately, was being held as one of the prizes. As like the grand prize for whoever won God Valley. Garling. And so she would have been in like the area where they were keeping everybody safe, where they were keeping all the prizes safe. Shanks and Shamrock would have possibly been in a similar area. And we know that Dragon managed to get them. I guess it's possible that during the time frame when the tournament was being all set up, that maybe Shocky... Ooh, what if it was a way of Garling taunting her? Ooh, that would have been good. What if Garling had the two boys with him, still following the rules, goes and visits Shocky, doesn't touch her, doesn't do anything, goes in, and it's just like, Shocky, Shakuyaku, my future bride, once I end this little tournament and prove myself. These are my sons, Shanks and Shamrock. They will be your sons soon, shortly. And maybe she saw that. Maybe that was something that Garling did. That seems very much like something in his wheelhouse that he would do, because he was so confident about being able to win the tournament. So maybe that was something that he did as a way of like taunting her, type of a thing. In Shocky's defense, had this gone horribly wrong and she ended up being won by Garling, not that I wanted that to happen, I would have hoped she would have at least tried to raise Shanks and Shamrock the best to her ability that she would have had, given the circumstances that she would have been in, but not something that I would wish upon anybody anyway. Back to this. So we are Roger Pirates wiped out. Predictably, news coverage was falsified. Only one aspect of the story was highlighted, the heroism of Garp. So we're cutting to a bunch of these different kingdoms all over the world. They're like reading about like the Rocks pirates have been defeated and everything like that. And at this incident, and Garp, the hero of the Marines, was there and he defeated them. And so it's like very much painting this heroic picture around Garp. And it's just like, it says here that the Rocks pirates have been vanquished. Rocks is dead! I was like, I knew it! Vice Admiral Garp is the strongest! Garp! He's a hero! So it's just like, we're getting like this celebratory thing from a bunch of the civilians. They're just like, the Rocks pirates are gone. Oh, thank God. Oh, it was Garp that did it. Oh, thank Garp! Type of a thing. They're just like so relieved about that. And, given the type of time frame that they live in, that makes perfect sense with, like, the way that the pirates and everything like that cause so many problems for so much of the world. Cutting to Grand Line Navy HQ. This is the original one where Marineford takes place. And it's like, what the hell is this article? And we see Garp has gotten out of his hospital bed. And he's just like, he's been reading through the article and now he's just like shredding the paper because he's so angry. And it's just like, Vice Admiral, calm down. It's just like, I can't wait to get my hands on that Morgans fella. And he's just like so angry at Morgans. And then Sengoku was there and he's just like, relax, Garp. He only wrote that stuff because the government paid him off. It's just like, come on, Garp, just calm down. And Sengoku is just like, the world government and the Marines are massive organizations. If you count the number of nations' armies, we're talking around tens of millions of soldiers worldwide. It's impossible to account for everybody's actions and motivations. It's just like, come on, Garp, you gotta calm down. You gotta understand. And so Sengoku is kind of trying to talk Garp down. It's just like, Garp, calm down. Okay, I get it. Maybe that's not the exact thing that happened. I know. And Garp is probably going to tell Sengoku something. Maybe not everything, but something. Because Sengoku knows that Roger and Garp worked together to take down Rocks. As much of that is kind of not the exact thing that happened. Just with a bunch of other contacts thrown out the window. Type of a thing. Because that's going to be the story that Sengoku tells to the other Marines later on. So there's like that difference there. So Garp is just not happening. It's just like, so if the top brass ever do strike me as insane, is like Garp's like, yeah, so if the top brass ever do make it that I'm crazy, it's like, what do you want me to do? And Sengoku's like, I'd simply turn a blind eye to it. And Garp is not happy. Come again? He is not happy by that comment. And Garp and Sengoku just kind of start throwing fists. And Garp is just like, it's just like I said, you're just another promotion chasing fool. And Sengoku is just like, shut up, what good can you do barking from the bottom of a cliff? So this is kind of like, what good are you going to do yelling at a mountain or whatever like that? What good are you going to do yelling at the base of this giant object? It's not going to make a difference. Is kind of the mentality that Sengoku is going with. It's like you can either fight against the system or you can work with the system or whatever, and it's just like, however you're going to go. From what we do know, Garp just stays in the Marines. He maybe is the one who forms the basis of Sword. We're not exactly sure where that came from yet, but he's probably going to be the one who forms the basis of it. Sengoku and Tsuru may end up helping with that because they all joined the Marines at the same time. They have known each other for so long, up to this point in time, almost 20 years. They're going to know each other for the rest of the time frame that the story is taking place, barring one of them dying. I don't really want any of them to die, but I'm not going to be surprised if Garp ends up dying at some point in time, or if Sengoku sacrificing himself to protect Law would be a very interesting way of ending that arc, ending Sengoku's character. Not that I want Sengoku to die, but that would be an interesting way of doing that. Or having it be that Sengoku tries to protect Law, gets very badly hurt in the process, and then Law ends up helping Sengoku. The way that he couldn't help Roshinate at the time, and now Law is able to do that. That would be a fun way of having that come full circle. Because there's so much fan art and stuff that I have seen that just has Sengoku kind of treating Law like a grandson, which is adorable. Because Sengoku was essentially Roshinate's father. Roshinate's adopted father. Which, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly, hasn't happened yet. That's going to be one of those other things that probably helps Sengoku along down certain alleys. There's also the thought that Roshinate was in Sword or something, so that's debatable. So, yeah. Roger is of the mind of I have to try to do something, and Sengoku is just what are you going to do just yelling at the bottom of a cliff? That's not going to make any difference. And they're just hey, you two, what are you, just please stop. And then Garp and Sengoku have kind of beaten each other up, and Sengoku's if you ever stray and get corrupted, I'll kill you myself, is what Garp's telling Sengoku. And Sengoku's how reassuring, I guess that's what friends are for. So it's just that very much bros butting heads type of thing. And Sengoku continues, so you're not quitting then, Garp? And Garp's idiot, as he's walking off. There are still things at the bottom of the cliff that need a guard dog. And this is going off of the whole thing that Garp tells Roger when Roger asks him to join his crew, become a pirate with him, leave the Marines and become a pirate. This is very much Roger being well, if I leave the Marines, who's going to look out for the little guy? Who's going to look out for the other Marines that are in trouble, that have been put into danger because of the fact of what the Gorosei really are, of what that giant shadow monster is? I can't just leave them at the mercy of that because they won't stand a chance. And if we are going to make changes in the Marines, we have to make them from the inside as well as the outside. Is kind of probably the way that Garp is going. And we're seeing those changes with Koby and Helmeppo and with Tashigi and Smoker and the rest of Sword and other Marines and stuff like that. And we're going to probably see some of that come to a head later on in the story once it gets closer to the end, and where it's where a lot of the Marines have to make this choice between either you serve the world government knowing that you are serving monsters who have allowed all of this for 800 years, or fight for what you know is right to protect the civilians and protect the people who are innocent and all of that stuff, regardless of whether or not they can pay the, celestial tribute. So we get that. Or kind of those options are that the Marines are going to have to pick from. Some of them we know where they're going to land. Some of them we know where they're going to land. Some of them are up in the air. We're not sure yet. Cutting to Elbath. So Elbath, the new world. And we see Loki here, and he is down in the primordial world, and he's just like throwing a tantrum because he's upset that Rox is dead. He's found out that information that Rox died at God Valley. And he is just crying, and he's very upset. Bear in mind, Loki's like, what, like mentally, I don't remember, 63. He's not that old mentally. He's like maybe still, I don't think he's even 10 years old, kind of mentally at this point in time in regards to giant years, or human age comparison. And he's just like very upset about this. And like we see him just like destroying a bunch of the mountains and everything else like that as he's just like roaming around. And we have him thinking back on like the conversations that he's had with Rox. And it's just like, you again. I ain't letting you on my ship. And it's just like, see him talking with Rox, and Rox is just like, how many times do I gotta tell you, Pipsqueak? You think I want a brat on my crew? And Loki is just crying and hiccuping. And we see this scene where it's just like Rox is like lying down on the ground, and Loki is there sitting next to him, and they're talking. And Rox is just like, what is this? The guy I want ain't giving me the time of day, but his snot-nosed brat won't leave me alone. And Loki, and they're just outside of Ida's pub on the coast. And Loki is just like, hey, Rox, I think you're Nika. What the heck's a Nika? It's probably like, what? Nika? What the heck's a Nika? And Loki is just like, the warrior of liberation who will destroy the world while laughing. So Loki kind of buys into more of the more destruction version of Nika, still liberating and like destroying like the world structure that has like it's people imprisoned in that type of a structure is kind of where Loki is more aiming for like what he thinks Nika is. And Rox goes, destroy it. I'm aiming to be the king of the world. Besides, if anyone's got that sort of power, it's Harald. And Loki's like, wait a minute, what, you mean my dad? What do you mean my dad has that type of power? I don't know what you're talking about. My dad's a coward. Loki does kind of view his dad as a coward, and I can see where that comes from. And Rox is just like, look up. Listen up, Loki. Somewhere out there, the Galli-Ra are slumbering. They're an outrageous band of ravagers. So this is, of course, referring to the ancient giants from so long ago, the Galli-Ra, which kind of seems to be associated with the Galli-Law. That is, of course, connected to like Iceberg and Water 7 and stuff. So we'll see how that comes into play. We think that all of the frozen giants that we saw on Punk Hazard are the Galli-Ra. So we'll see how that goes. And it's just like, and the only one who can put them back into play is your Pops. And it's just like, I'm going to continue to rally the rogues of the world. So we don't exactly know the full context for this. This may have been one of the last times Rox visited Elbath or something. We're not exactly sure when this would have happened. But possibly fairly recently. And of course, Rox has like some access to like other information and like that he's been, probably gathering up a lot over the years. And he's just like, so just imagine if Harald and I teamed up. Who could possibly stop us then? And Loki's just kind of, oh, that's awesome. Because he really likes that idea of like Harald and Rox working together. He likes the idea of his dad being strong and not being this kind of coward that he sees him as, that like tries to kowtow to the world government. Because, of course, Loki just thinks Rox is, like, the coolest guy ever. It's like, yeah, your dad has an old friend from high school or from college that, like, they're kind of friends, but not all the time. And, like, your dad's the accountant, and your dad's friend is, like, the really cool motorcycle riding, rock music playing, cool guy. And you're just like, he's awesome. My dad's an accountant type of a thing. Is like kind of how that lands, as a little bit kind of where that lands, which is kind of funny. You're like, but he's cool. My dad just does math all the time. And that might be like the mentality that Loki has about his dad, because that's all that he's known his dad for his entire life, is like wanting to make peace with humans, wanting to do a bunch of that stuff. Because he hasn't really seen what Harald has been doing. He's just kind of heard about it and possibly some slander about it. And Loki and Rock still keep talking. It's just like, so why aren't you and Pop's allies already? And Rock is like, because of love. And Loki's like, what's love got to do with it? That's probably what he's thinking. And Rox continues, but I'm going to come back again and again. I don't care if it takes 100 or 200 meetings. So Rox, and like we see that it is cut to a different season. Before, it kind of looked like maybe spring. And then now we see that it is very much winter all around Loki, where it is just snow all over the ground, blizzard outside, as he was like crying and everything like that. And we see him holding the paper that has the announcement of like Rox's death. And he is just so upset and so distraught by this. This would be very similar to like if when Luffy was growing up after Shanks left Fuchsia, if there was just this like an article that came out one day in the newspaper, and Shanks, and like Luffy goes to the bar and he finds out that Shanks had died, that Shanks had been killed. And Luffy would have been so distraught by that. I don't know what would have happened to Luffy at that point in time, whether he still would have like doubled down on his efforts to become a pirate, to become the king of the pirates, whether or not he would have tried to, depending on, this would all depend on also like if Ace and Sabo were still around at that point in time, Luffy would have been very, very upset about that. If that happened, he'd be upset about it now if it happened. We kind of saw some hints of that in some of the flashback stuff for Film Red. To be fair, that's not necessarily canon, but it gives you an idea of like how upset Luffy was with, Uta not coming back. And like, so Loki is still very, very distraught about that. So next page, we have another double page spread. A certain island, we don't know this island, or at least I don't think so. And it's just like a vicious assault. King Harald of Hellbath is, have any civilians been harmed? No. And it's just like, he attacked another giant, some thug. It's quite a brutal scene. And we see like the civilians of this kingdom just looking on as Harald is just like wailing on this other giant. And it's just like and this is very much Harald looking like, a demon. And it's just like, you still don't get it. And the other one's like, I understand. I'm sorry. Please stop. I won't do it again. Please, please. And he's like, begging. And it's just like, you don't get it. None of you do. Huge trash heaps like you are responsible for the terrors in our race's history. And that's why we can't be trusted. We only desire to peacefully engage with the world now, but they can't trust that. And Harald, you are not helping your argument right here. You are beating up a giant who, yes, was terrorizing the humans, was stealing from them. But you are now just beating up this guy in the middle of their kingdom, causing a bunch of damage in the process, a bunch of collateral damage in the process. And you're beating up this guy. You're terrifying the citizens even more because you just look scary. And you're not helping the situation one way or the other. And it's very much that meme of, oh my god, stop beating him, he's already dead, type of a thing. Where he's just like beating away at the guy. And it's just like, Highness, his men are like, Your Highness, he's already out cold, please stop. And Harald just continued, I didn't want to jeopardize Elbaf's chances of joining the world's government. That was my only reason for not helping him. And he's very much like blaming himself for the fact that he didn't go and help Rox. And that possibly part of the reason that he didn't go to help Rox, led to Rox's death. I don't exactly know how much of a difference Harald would have made had he been on God Valley, had he gone with Harald to God Valley. If anything, that may have been the thing that resulted in Harald and Rox surviving, because even with like Rox and Roger, and with like Garp and Roger fighting against him, and even Harald being brought into that situation, and none of them being Domi Reversied, if it has to be you're on your home island type of thing, none of them being Domi Reversied, then, having Harald there would have been just this other person that could help with trying to restrain and take down Rox and knock him out of the Domi Reversi. Or maybe, Harald would have been able to do something with that. We're not sure. But, get all that taken care of. And it may have resulted in maybe Harald got Rox out of there instead, had he shown up at the right time. And maybe Rox wouldn't have died to Garling. So there's that. But he's just like, I forsook my closest friend as he begged me for aid. I left him to die. And so Harald is just like very much beating himself up with that as he's beating up this other giant, taking out his aggression on the other giant. And we see there's like another giant lying in the rubble. And Harald is just like screaming the words like, there's no turning back now. I'll never ever forgive a giant who does evil. So he is very much like, I am just so far past wanting to do this the right way. I am just going to like brute force type of a thing. And like the citizens of this kingdom who may know Harald are just like, oh my god. Like they're just so, and it's just like, the newspaper, Giant King loses it. That's quite the headline with probably quite the picture. Cutting back to Navy HQ, underground detention cell. And we see Dragon sitting in the cell, handcuffed, and we see Garp outside of the cell. And Garp is just like, Dad, I'm going to quit the Marines. Garp, okay. And Dragon's like, and you? I despise you. And he's just like looking at Dragon, or Dragon is looking at Garp with this loathing of just like, I just despise you. I despise that you have stayed in this organization for so long, that you have seen what they do, what the nobles do, and that you still stay here, that you still work for them, that you still fight for them, that you still protect them. I don't think Dragon is mad at his dad in regards to Garp protecting civilians and taking out pirates who deserve it. He's angry at his father for the fact that he allows those types of things that just happened on God Valley to continue to happen. And Garp just kind of is like, okay. And we hear clank, and he tosses the key into the cell to Dragon. And Garp essentially allows Dragon to escape. Because Dragon is his son. And as much of, like, this is the only scene, I believe, that we have ever seen Dragon and Garp together. And we figured there was going to be a scene like this. I thought it might have involved a bit more yelling, maybe on Garp's part, but at this point, Garp is just resigned to this. And I think that's the other side. There are two sides of the same coin at the moment. Garp is this guy who has decided to stand at the bottom of the cliff and keep yelling at it. Dragon is the guy who is going to go find his way to whatever type of a machinery he can get his hands on to start chipping away at that cliff from any angle he can get his hands on, from any angle he can get to in order to make that cliff fall. He is going to find the weak points in that cliff. He is going to find anything that he can to get that cliff to start shaking, to start falling, to try to bring down the corruption and the horribleness in the world government. and the Marines, and in the Gorosei, and in the Celestial Dragons, and unbeknownst to him, Emu, but all of that. And Dragon's gonna have a fun time doing that for the next 38 years. He's gonna meet some of his best friends, and he's gonna go through a lot of horrible things too. Happens in Ohara, what happens with Ginny, what happens with Kuma, all of it. Dragon's gonna see all of that. And this is Dragon at 17 years old, the same age Luffy was when he set out, the same age Luffy was when he lost his crew and they were all split up at Sabaody and he thought they were all dead. And here he is. Here's Dragon, having been at his lowest, weakest moment, and now in prison, just the same way that Luffy was. Not quite the same way as Luffy, but still imprisoned. And his father is like, go. And I do kind of wonder if it is a little bit of the, I'll stand here and yell at the cliff. You go and do what you can to make that cliff collapse. I'm kind of interested in that. And then there's like the whole question of like, what if Garp went with Dragon? What if later on Garp went with Dragon and joined the revolutionaries? What if there's some connections there that could have been done? Things that made it different. Back to Elbaf. Harald appears to be getting ready to set out on a bit of a journey. And he is saying goodbye. And he, it's just like, Harald! And he's just like, I've made up my mind, Ida. Elder Jarl, I don't care about appearances anymore. And he's looking at Hyrule and Loki, and he's just like, he's just like, you both, my precious sons. I want you to get along when I'm gone. Very much the Loki and Thor with Odin in the beginning of Thor. You are both my sons, and you are both born to be kings, type of thing. And Harald heads off, and he's thinking, and do what you can to support Elbaf. It's just like, you are my sons. I want you to work together and do what you can to support Elbaf. Yeah, that doesn't work. At least not yet. And he's headed to Marine HQ. And it's just like, that ship's from Elbaf. What? And one of the Marines is there, and it's just like, my apologies, King Harald, but my superiors have ordered me to not let you land. And we get the last double-page spread of the chapter. And last 2 pages. And Harald is like stepping off of his ship and like onto one of the docks, and it's just like, high-ranking Marines and leaders of the world government, I ask that you please hear me out. And he reaches up and he puts his hands on his horns. And he's... I do not know what force and strength that would take to do that. Because they're not like reindeer horns where they're supposed to fall off. Those aren't supposed to come off. Just, and I just, the pain. Just, I've had headaches. That, oh God, no. And like, we see him there just like, as he like falls to his knees, and he's just like, allow me to atone for the sins of the past 1,000 years. I apologize for every wrong the giant race has committed. The children of Elbaf are being raised to live without harming others, so that one day they may walk hand in hand with humanity. I do all this to prove our unwavering commitment to peace. And he continues, I'll do what, and he's got blood pouring down his face from where he ripped off his horns, and I'll do whatever it takes to atone for our sins, even if it means becoming a slave. It's going to be interesting to see how the official translates this, to see how much of a difference that makes. And the last panel is Emu's eye. Because that very much ties into the fact that Emu taunted Rocks by saying that he could go after Harald. And that Harald was this perfect pawn for him to be able to use. And given what's happening on Elbaf now and how Harald died, I still have to agree with the statement of what I said in the video where I talked about Harald's death last week, that his is partly, it is in the name of an honorable cause, of a noble cause, but it is also his own hubris and stupidity that he refuses to see the flaws in what the world government does. And that he is willing to do this, to supplicate himself and his people for this. And yes, there have been many kings throughout history in our own world who have done similar things in order to try to protect their people. Some cases because they didn't have the ability to do anything else. In other cases because of the fact that their opponent was so much stronger than them and there wasn't anything else that they could do to try to stop it. But this is very much, Harald is not taking into account everything that he should be aware of in regards to this. I understand wanting to make humanity not terrified of the giants anymore because of what he's learned from Ida and because of wanting to, help dragons. Wrong. Harald help dragon. Go help dragon. Have Harald help the humans and the giants to be able to see eye to eye better, to not have the giants think that they are better than the humans, and not have the humans think that giants are these just monsters that they have thought that they were for the past thousands of years, and go through all of that. And the way that he had been doing it before was a very good way of doing it, but now that he is supplicating himself to the world government like this, that he is going through all of this, is another reason probably why Loki and Harald do not get along. And even why Hyrudin, while he still loves his father, still has some issues. And why maybe Hyrudin wants to try to follow in his father's footsteps more, but Loki doesn't because of reasons and all of that. And we're going to see how all of this ends up finishing out with the rest of the flashback, which we have no break next week. Next week is Thanksgiving. We'll see how all of that lines up. With the chapter and the chapter review, and I work on Black Friday, and the chapter's probably going to be out on Black Friday or Saturday, so we'll see how all of that lines up. Fun. But, so there's so much of that's going on, and it'll be very interesting to see how all of that lines up. How, in his final moments, is Harald regretting this decision that he made to make this essentially pact with the devil to the world government? Is he going to be, is he going to regret that? Is that part of what's going to happen for, the story that we're going to end up hearing from Loki and Shanks and Scopper, from what's happening on Elbath and everything, that where this flashback started 12 years ago as opposed to 100 something years ago. So we'll see how that goes. That'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. So that's what we have here. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye, and happy Thanksgiving.